Hey, this is AP Lit, and we're looking at the poetry of Walt Whitman. And let me read the poem to you. I hear America singing by Walt Whitman. I hear America singing the very carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam. The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. The woodcutter's song. The plowboys on his way in the morning. The delicious singing of the mother and of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing, each singing what belongs to him or her, and to no one else or to none else. The day what belongs to the day, the night, at night the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs. I'll read it again. Just, that's a good habit to get it. It's short, you can read it. See if you notice anything. I would get a pencil and circle it. You won't find it if you see something. There's some questions there that are useful, but I think we can, you need to have those internal questions. You need to, again, know what to ask the speaker, the audience, the setting, the occasion, and then, organization and meaning, and then the devices. What's the poem trying to say? It says, I hear America singing. I guess I could start, to me, that alone tells you all you need to know about the tone of the piece. Because I can't think of any singing. I mean, I know there are dirges and things like that there, but those are rare. You think of, I always associate singing with positive things, with happy things. You whistle while you work, that thing. So I would start there. I think that the tone is clearly, his attitude toward his subject is positive. Well, what is his subject? A lot of singing going on. Yeah.
Well, I think that throughout the entire thing, it says like people who are doing different trades or different types of work. So they're singing of their trade or their job
I love the idea of the variety of work, yet there is a continuity with that work. Do you notice anything that connects them? Although they're varied, what connects them? Do you see that, or did you have something else?
Different comment.
Okay, well, anybody answer that before we go to Emily? Do you see anything that connects these jobs? You notice how many jobs? Yeah. So, right.
Well, I was just gonna say they're all like skilled trades.
Yeah, I was working with the hands, mechanic, carpenter, mason, boatman, shoemaker, hatter, woodcutter, plowboy, and then it goes to the mothers. But yeah, they're all, wonder why he chose that. What would be the other kind of job? Or there's more than just two kinds of jobs, but typically we did talk of jobs as white collar and blue collar. So what's the other kind of job, if these are all working with your hands with trade? Yeah, Colin.
Like a 9 to 5 desk job, where you're just sitting at a desk all day.
All right, so we used to call that white collar jobs, more professions, maybe. None of those are included. Can you draw any conclusion? And I don't know what Emily was gonna say, I don't wanna steal it, but can anybody draw any conclusions about why he chose that kind of job? Yeah.
Well, I think he's saying the people who do these jobs are the spirit and soul of America. And then also, at the end, when he differentiates day and night, I see a healthy separation of work and play, which I believe has been lost in the current day.
I like that. That's really good. It's though as if the people that are working hard during the day, they, I don't wanna say party, that has certain connotations, but they party at night. They put the same energy. Have you ever noticed, I don't know, I feel better, I've been working since age 16, and I feel better after a good day's work than I do without. I mean, I love days off, I love vacations, don't get me wrong, but I feel pretty good after having put in a hard day's work. Do you feel that way? I'd rather go to school and come home and enjoy things, I'm thinking from your perspective, than have the day off, although there are benefits to that too. I kind of feel better about myself. I don't know what that says. So good point. Again, blue collar jobs, they're singing, we don't know why yet. And yeah, what else do you notice about the jobs, and why are they singing? Never really heard, you ever heard anybody sing while they work? I guess I have, but it's not normal, I don't guess. What does that tell you? They're singing while they work. And of course, are they really singing? Is it literal or is it figurative?
I mean, maybe, I don't know, but if I ever heard someone singing, I would think that they've been doing that certain work for a while. Because when you start working, you're kind of occupied with it, but once you've been doing it for over a long period of time, you're used to it, and you're just trying to find something else to do to fill your time. So maybe they've been doing their jobs for a while.
And maybe they do it well.
Yeah.
They're so familiar with it. Yeah, Eli. Welcome back, by the way.
It might be like a passion thing, where like the singing is sort of a metaphor for their working like passionately, like
Yeah.
they enjoy their jobs,
Yeah.
and they're like proud of what they do, rather than someone else who might not
Yeah,
be as proud.
very good. I think that's very much. I'd have to agree that these are people happy at their work. You think most people, maybe we read what Thoreau said about it, that he saw people in New England, their work looked like penance, meaning punishment. They looked like they were paying off a debt, and literally many of them were paying off a debt. They were in debt, so they had to work in order to pay it off. That's not what you see here. So which is the more accurate? You don't have to answer that, but think about it. Is it Thoreau's view of work, what he saw people working as, or Whitman here? So other thoughts about the kinds of jobs or what he's getting at? Any other nuances besides that? I noticed, yeah.
I just noticed that it said they're singing about what belongs to them.
Yes.
And so I just was kind of thinking, kind of like what Emily said, how they're the spirit of America, where they're enjoying the fact that the work of their hands is what is like providing for them, or like just having this kind of freedom to work almost, where they get to do something they like are passionate about that sustains them, or is their
Yeah, there's an element of ownership. You may have been told, you gotta own it, you know, maybe a coach or, you know, you're never gonna, we used to say that about school, that students would never be successful in school like it's supposed to be if a student didn't own his work. And so there's something there, yeah, Courtney.
I think sort of going along with what everybody's saying, the singing and all the jobs working together, it's like, it reminds me of a community because all these jobs are different and they're their own song, I guess, or whatever. And then they all work together to form a community, so they all kind of rely on each other for the whole community to function. And that also, I feel like fits into the song thing a little bit because, I mean, you don't really sing by yourself very often. I feel like that's more of a group thing.
Yeah,
I mean, you can,
I know.
but it also isn't.
I think that, and you know, what you're talking about is connotation. What you're talking about is when you think of singing, that's sort of the first thing pops in your mind. Maybe somebody else sings something differently. Remember, good poets, they're good with that. They're good with the connotations you bring to it versus someone else. That's what makes the poem really more rich, yes.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the community thing, cause like, he talks about jobs like the carpenter, the mason, the boatman, and you see those jobs and you think men would do those jobs, but then he goes on, I find it interesting that he mentions a mother. So not only is he mentioning jobs of like the men and like the hands-on men, but he mentions like a woman and what she goes through too, so it's kind of like everyone comes together doing their jobs, not just like stereotypical like men jobs, then there's also just the woman.
Yeah, think about how much, and there were women that were working outside the home. There were factories. You've done you're doing the Industrial Revolution thing. You know how women were working. But think about if you've ever had to clean up your room, whatever your chores. Remember, you used to talk about chores. It's to have a good working home environment. Work has to be done there. And it mentioned sewing and washing. Think how much work it takes to just make a home. You're not getting money. You're maybe saving a lot of money by doing it yourself. So that's a really good point, Emily.
Well, I think it's interesting how we assume the young woman to be a mother, when it says that she's a young wife.
We have maybe two different people.
And I liked how he said young wife instead of mother, because I felt like that kind of put her value in what she contributes and rather than in her ability to have children.
Because it says the singing of the mother, or like, you know, there are women that are married. You know, there are women that are married, women are married and have children, some that don't. Any other thoughts? There are a couple of things I'd like to point out. It's free verse, and so you need to know that about him. It's not rhymed, and it's not metered. It doesn't have a meter to it. In fact, it looks a lot like prose, really long sentences and of various lengths. Why do you think the free verse here is appropriate for this poem? And you don't know this yet, or maybe I mentioned it. He saw himself as the poet of America, the poet of the common man. That would make sense, that he writes poetry about common type jobs as opposed to professional jobs. Why don't we go with Colleen and then?
Well, if you were to put it in like prose and have everything rhyme and stuff, I guess it seems more elevated that way. But he's talking about the common man and the simple duties that people are doing, so it just makes more sense for it to be in three verses.
That's a great answer. It's about the common man, the vernacular. He uses the vernacular, the speech of the common man, the colloquial speech, because that's what the poet. Remember, it's so important that sound and sense go together. Form, sound, and sense all working together. If you have one of those out of kilter, the poem it loses something. Do any of you? Well, the thing about belonging, I always like that. But I think of private property. You know, I think of this idea: if something belongs to you, it's yours and not somebody else's. I think about the Bible saying, "Thou shalt not steal." That's the assumption that there is something called private property, right? If it's just all collectively owned, how could you be stealing? And so I've often thought about that as, you know, because we have that debate, you know, socialism, capitalism, and all that. But I think I see this basis in culture and even in scripture of private property, just the assumption people are gonna own things. Some people are gonna own more things than others. That's why you have to have, this concern about justice and social justice, to take care of the widows, the poor, all the people that the Bible points out particularly that, we have to look after. But this is sort of a recognition that there is private property. And again, I mentioned earlier, unless you own something, they used to say that about the Soviet Union. That's why they weren't making very good products, because it was all collective. There was no incentive to be a good worker, because the harder you worked, you weren't going to make any more money. You weren't going to invent anything, because there was no room for private enterprise and private invention. And so owning something brings out the best in us. That's why when you own your education, and you're not doing it just because you have to be there, you're under 16 and your parents make you, when you realize the value of it, you're gonna do better than someone else. So that's really an American idea, one we've always been for, is private property, private ownership of things. Do you know what the motto of the United States is? I don't know, we may have two. I think about the coins and the bills. I think they usually, "In God we trust," but do you know what the other motto is?
E pluribus unum.
You know what it means?
Out of many one.
You see that here, you see somebody mentioned the collective, the community versus the individual. Versus, why, there's no versus to it. It's like one opposed to the other. They're both at work here. You have the various jobs, but they're all singing. And what else are they all?
They're all working.
Yes. And what else are they? It's so obvious that you tend not to think of it. I hear who singing? So they all see themselves as Americans. Were they originally all Americans? None of them were, except the Native Americans. None of the Americans were originally Americans. They all came from someplace else, and yet they see themselves now as this common bond. I've got several other things I don't want to steal from what you might say, but what did I say, 12? I forgot the number of jobs. Let's just say 12, whatever the number is. You could almost call this a list. What type of literature like list? Very good. I am really impressed. 2 years ago, 2.5, almost 3 years ago, we called them catalogs. And what was the purpose of listing? Like, there is a practical reason why you would list rather than say, oh, there were just a lot of jobs here. Yeah.
To provide more detail
And what does the detail actually accomplish?
in this.
Oh, yeah, this and any time you would use a list. Why would you choose to list it all out as opposed to just kind of summarize it and say, just trust me, there are a lot of people there? Yeah.
I guess it like provides a better image for you. You can't like see it yourself, so you have to like kind of create the image.
It's the good poetry, good writing shows, doesn't tell. So don't just tell me there were a lot, show me. And so epic poetry the list gave you a sense of vastness and scope. Remember, I think in the notes, he wanted to be an epic, he wanted to write the American epic. Now, epics are usually narratives, his were not narratives, but they did try to express the vastness, the broadness of America. It's kind of an epic feel. So again, the free verse, the listing, all work together to create this theme. Anybody want to eventually summarize, if we finish it, what is the theme? What is the theme? If you had to summarize what he was getting at here. Why don't you do this? Write it down. See if you can just articulate it yourself, and I'll ask somebody to share it. Write down in a sentence. By the way, the last papers you did, I thought most of you really made an effort to identify the meaning of all the King's Men, and then show how the character who was flawed, and what would we say it was? What's the word that we?
Should I be?
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, you're okay. We're not going to do that. But remember, it always talks about this mixed person and these mixed characters, not all good, not all bad. And anyway, I think that's, see what you can do, see what you can, most of you tried to state that, and I'm asking you to do that. Write it down in one sentence. What do you think the meaning of the poem is? Kind of incorporate everything we just said, or the most important things we just said. Anybody want to share? We can hear two or three, and they're not all are going to be the same. Emily's going to start, and I'll call on a couple of others.
I said Whitman intended to convey the importance of America's unity by means of imagery of the American workforce, consequentially providing the blue-collar workers with validation and encouragement, even to the point of romanticizing them.
Huh. Which is very true. We just said, compare this to Thoreau, didn't romanticize it. Yeah, Eli.
I said America isn't defined by occupation or social status, but by its people and their passion, whatever form it may take.
I like that, because that's something we've always celebrated. We don't have strata, or we don't have social classes like England and like some other parts of the country. We kind of earn your respect. We earn your respect. If I do my job well, then you respect me, not who my daddy is or how much money or the house I live in. Very good. These are other things that come to my mind. Other, Kieran.
I said, I think the meaning of the poem is to show the value of an individual's hard work and to show how that benefits not only the individual doing the work, but their community at large.
I like it. Kinsley, how about you?
The meaning of this poem is that although everyone came from different places and has a different occupation, they can all come together and work happily in a new country.
Wow, I like it. Clayton, what about it? One more.
The common people from all types of jobs are the ones who make America what it is.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote this, the poem celebrates the American work ethic, showing both the diversity and unity of the nation. That's so timely. It just seemed like that's been a buzzword for the past decade or so, is diversity. And nobody has a right better to say that than America. We're one of the most diverse cultures in the world, and yet we managed to keep our unity through most of that, although we've had our moments. That's what we're still, I think, trying to maintain. Very good. Now, turn the page. We go from work to a different kind of work, to education. And I'm going to ask you, again, simple poem. I've always liked this poem. I'm going to ask you to read it to yourselves and answer the question. And it's another poem that illustrates very well that the working together of sound and sense, meaning and structure. So see what you can do with When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. right, you have about 12 minutes, if you're still working. Again, what are some things that you can be doing? Whenever we do something like this, I always try to keep it in the big picture. You're trying to show how every element that you can find in the poem is working to the same end. And that end is whatever you think the meaning is. And your job, ultimately, and what they'll ultimately ask you, is to show how all the elements you can find are working toward that end. So I prefer, here's a great example of starting with the questions, the setting, the speaker, the audience, and all of that. Mason, can you get us started? What is the setting? Question really 1 and 2. What is the speaker, the setting, the audience, the occasion? Can you kind of clarify that for us?
Well, the speaker to me seems to be some sort of student because you're listening to a lecture.
Right.
In some sort of ritual. So.
Right. And I can't just point out the obvious. The odd, what you just said, doesn't mean Walt Whitman. Sometimes it might. Like when we do Emily Dickinson, you have to draw the conclusion that she's talking about herself, even though it's the same I as you have here. But Whitman, it may or may not be him. And so what you said was a good way to put it. So keep going.
I'd say the setting, well, at some point he's in, obviously, the astronomer's classroom where the astronomer is teaching poetry, people listening, but then also, near the end it says, and I got a little confused about this part, he went outside or something of the classroom after class, and he started looking up at the stars and sort of felt himself going up there with it and thought we connected all of it, so.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that he's in a astronomy classroom, and when he leaves, he looks at stars. So keep that in mind. The 2 parts of the poem are connected by stars. A good start. There's a difference in those 2 parts. Did you notice where the 2 parts of the poem, the shift occurs? So there's a shift. So what is, you've already pointed out that he leaves. He takes an action and he leaves. Why does he leave? What's the difference in the way the speaker feels in the first half as opposed to the second half? Marie, what do you think?
Well, in the first half, he's listening to things like proofs and figures and columns and charts and diagrams, which are all very, dry and, more, I don't know, just boring. And then, so he gets tired and sick, he says, so then he goes outside. And I just noticed that those things which were meant to help you understand the stars were kind of contrasted with the mystical moist night air. And so I felt like he was kind of trying to say that, when the teacher was trying to help them understand the stars, he was really making the stars lose their beauty and their purpose, kind of, which is to make us get on.
And you kind of answered this. I think you put it very well. The different attitudes the speaker has towards sitting in the classroom and walking outside. Which of those two settings, you've already kind of answered this, but which of those 2 settings does the poet, the speaker, approve of? You've already said that, but want us to approve of. In other words, what does he do to make us agree with it? What does the speaker do to make us feel the way he felt? Which is the purpose of all poetry, is to get you to experience what the speaker experienced. It's a shared experience. Yes.
I lost my train of thought. So he sort of breaks it up into 2 sections as far as the style of what he's writing.
Right.
Using words and phrases that are kind of more rigid, like what Marie said. And then when he talks about, it sort of changes when he starts talking about how he got tired and sick. And then he wanders off, and then he starts looking at the sky and stuff like that. So I guess he makes it boring for us to read.
Right. And how does he do that? That's a great way to
He just kind of lists things.
That's
and
one
then
thing.
when he leaves, it's like he's gliding and it's mystical
Right.
and all that.
What's he doing while he's in the classroom?
He's just sitting.
He's sitting and he's listening. And he makes a list which makes it boring. Anything else you noticed about it that makes it boring? Because that's the way he felt. He wants you to feel that way. Any other device you noticed?
Some violin
Yeah, remember what do we call that? I don't know if we've gotten there yet. You know what that's called? No, anybody. You know what the technical name is for that? I think we had that on that first quiz. Literally, anaphora. So listing, the first word is repeated. What does that do? What does that do to the boredom of the setting? It's not a very important word, you know, I mean, it's just a regular conjunction, so I think it contributes to that boredom, yeah.
Well, there's no variety in sentence structure or anything, so it's just boring.
Right.
Like Emmeline's poems.
Explain that.
In Huckfin, just that if she reused the same sentence structure over and over and over again.
And we know his purpose there, and that's a great connection. His purpose was to make fun of that poem and that type of poem. And he's trying to do the same here in a way, to make fun of or to lower in estimation that first type. I noticed that also it's all in passive, well, twice he uses passive voice. Do you remember what passive voice is? What's passive voice? Probably the Latin students know this stuff better. Do they have passive voice in Latin?
Yes.
What's passive voice? Yeah.
Well, I'm not Latin student, but I remember correctly, it's like you're seeing or describing the action taking place, but you're not directly in the action.
We'd like to.
Okay, well, how would you
Go ahead,
add?
Latin.
Would you add anything to that?
Active is when the speaker is doing the action.
You hear this? This is a great way to think about it.
Passive is when the action is being done in the speaker.
So it says, I heard, now that's active voice, but still hearing is not a particularly active, thing. When the charts were arranged, anytime you see the verb to be, that sort of helps make the passive. When the proofs were arranged, so the subject proofs were being acted on. When I was shown, he's being acted, the subject I is being shown, so he's being acted upon. As opposed to that second part of the stanza, notice I became sick and tired. Well, he's still inside at that point. Then he said, rising going, I wandered, I looked up. So he uses the active voice. So anything about those, and Marie mentioned, I think you mentioned the one about mystical, moist night air. What literary devices are used there to make that sound so pleasant as it does? Alliteration. It's an image, mystical, moist. You can taste it or feel it. You know, that's what imagery does. We're running out of time, but so this is a story about what? I mean, this is a poem about what? If you had to talk about the meaning of this poem, what's the poem about? And I wouldn't ask you that if I didn't think it's more than stars. What is the poem about? It's not just stars. The poem's not just about stars. So what's the poem about? What does it mean? What's he trying to get?
Well, it's like when Thoreau said in Walden that hunters and fishermen learn more about the world than philosophers because they see it from nature and not from.
That's a
the classroom.
great analogy. So express it. What is he saying? Even the thing about the hunting and fishing. What's the difference between that and some other way to learn about nature?
Sometimes being among or within what you're learning about is more helpful than seeing it from the outside.
So experience in this poem seems to be a better teacher than books and teachers. Do you agree with it? And is it mutual? Are they mutually exclusive? In other words, is it one or the other? What can it be? I mean, you have to choose right now. You're either going to stay in this classroom and get these lecture notes about the stars, or you can go outside and learn about it yourself. It's one or the other. Is it one or the other?
I'd like to go outside and count leaves.
Well, is it one or the other? If those are your two options, no, what's the third option? Do both. Because what is the value? We've already stated the value of going outside, but what is the value of staying inside and learning from astronomers?
It's a controlled learning environment.
And what else? Yes. What else can the astronomer tell you that you cannot learn by looking up at the stars? I mean, think of all the things he can tell you. He could tell you how far away they are. He could tell you all sorts of things, what they're made of. You can't learn that by looking at them. So I think the beauty of this poem is not either or, although the poem actually does present that. In this case, it's either one or the other. It's really, as we know, it's really both. I wish we had read, I was kind of advocating Hard Times, we read Great Expectations. Hard Times is a poem just about education, essentially, the outcome of two different forms of education that are fit in here. So you have some reading to do for tomorrow. I'll give you these notes sometime, and just please be prepared for that.